Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babiar, and I'm the Training Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you're a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, fully funded Great Commission worker. My guest today is Scott Morton. Scott is a friend and mentor to many, including Steve Shadrack, who wrote the God Ask. But Scott, I know that you have a couple of books of your own, and you've been blessing many of us for many years through your wisdom and knowledge on the topic of raising support. But we'll get into talking about those books here in just a second. But first of all, welcome, my friend. I'm glad you're here today.
Well, thank you, Aaron. I'm delighted.
Now, you're recording this, of course, I'm in Northwest Arkansas. Are you in Colorado Springs today?
I'm in Colorado Springs, where we had about 8 inches of snow the last couple of days, but it's going to be all the way up to 47 today.
Oh, wow. Balmy winter weather. And it's not even Thanksgiving yet at the time we're recording this.
The sky is blue and the wind is out of the west at about 80 miles an hour.
Well, at the time we're recording this, the World Series just ended. And I know you're a big baseball guy, so were you happy with the results of the Washington Nationals winning the World Series?
Yes, I was. Somehow I was pulling for the Nationals. I don't know why, but I liked them. It was an exciting game.
Yeah. Well, I've always loved that that's part of your history, that you were a pro baseball player, and I have a little bit less glorious baseball in my past as well. So I tell you, though, Scott, so many times I come up with baseball analogies when I'm talking about support raising. I have to temper myself a little bit to remember that not everybody knows baseball. So
Right.
You get stuck in that rut pretty quickly, right?
Yes, that's easy.
Well, an end of the year discussion is at hand. Of course, the time that we're recording this and when we plan to publish this, is towards the end of 2019. I think a lot of what we're discussing would actually be just as apropos in future years once you get to November and December. But Scott, end of year is it's just different, particularly if you're in the United States. Not saying that there couldn't be some similarities if you live in another country, but if you're ministering overseas and you're from the U.S., or if you live and are ministering in the U.S., that's kind of a unique time, isn't it, Scott?
Yes, but not only for the U.S. I like this time of year, a lot of people can raise 25 to 50% of their whole year's fundraising just in the month of December, January. Mm-hmm. And I like to take it one step further. I like the term no-semuary. Part of November, part of December, part of January. No-semuary.
Okay.
So the best time to send out your letter is right toward the end of November, early December. But this time of year, even if you are not in America, some of my African friends say, well, Scott, it wouldn't pay us because there's no tax advantage in any country in Africa. But even at that, your readers of your newsletters and your donors and your friends, when the calendar turns over, they all think about their diet, number one.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Yeah, I do. And they think about their finances, number two. So some, it means a raise, it means a new job. But it's just a time of year to say, let's start things over again. So even if there's no tax advantage, I urge you to send out an end of the year, beginning of year appeal letter asking your friends and partners and non-donors and lapsed donors to start in again.
Yes. That is a good point, even right there, that it does seem like there's, at least, and you might have better insight than I do, but to me, it seems like there's about 3 times of the year that people are just going through some sort of shift. And it's typically when the school calendar begins, when the school calendar ends, and the actual end of the Roman calendar year, right?
Yes, and this is the biggest one. This is the most important. So December, January is the prime time. If you don't send a letter out end of year, start of year, you're leaving money on the table. Yes.
Now, Scott, a lot of people think, well, yeah, everybody's just gonna, they're gonna respond because I sent my end of year letter. I just as long as it gets there before January 1st, I'm good. But we found that's not necessarily true, is it?
Well, I've listed here 5 typical errors that people make in sending out their end of the year or start of the year letter. So let me just list them here, and then maybe we can go through some other tips on what is good to do.
Okay.
Yeah, the first error that people make is they send the letter only to their donors. Well, the end of the year letter asking is a good time to ask new people or non-donors to give or lapsed donors to give. So don't send it just to your donors, send it to everybody on the planet. The second error people make is they simply take their annual Christmas letter, which they usually print on red or green paper, which is hard to read, Aaron, right?
Hmm.
So they send that annual newsletter, and then they add a final paragraph or a PS. Oh, by the way, please pray about our support. Help us at this time of the year. We've tracked it, Aaron, and we have found out that the letters, the appeals that are added to a newsletter, don't do nearly as well as appeals that are straight up appeal letters. They're not part of a newsletter. Does that
Mm.
make sense?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay, the third one then is that people think, well, I'm not going to send a letter at all because there's some non Christian on my list or there's some family members that wouldn't appreciate it. So they don't send a letter at all. That's a mistake. Send a letter. But what I do, I simply take a look at my non believers that are on the list, or at least I think they're non believers. I don't know for sure.
Sure.
I take their name out. I don't send to them. And then there's some family members that I usually don't send to family members, and sometimes I don't send to some of my fellow staff members. So go ahead and put your whole mailing list out there, but then pick out one or two or three or five or 10 that you don't want to send the letter to because they might be offended.
So
But
don't just jump into it and go, I'll just send this to everybody, but really send a wise, well thought out, I guess you call it a mailing list. Make sure your email list is up to date, but that it doesn't just necessarily go to everybody, right?
well, because there's some that might be offended, and yeah, so take them out, but don't take out 30 or 40 or 50 or 100 or 200 names. Take out 5 or 10, maybe 20,
Okay. Be very
because
intentional.
be one by one do it. So that's the third mistake people make. The fourth mistake people make is they do it all by email. Now, Aaron, I'm sure that some of our listeners today, that's all they've got is an email list, not a hard copy, especially in some countries where the physical addresses are impossible. But let me tell you this, you'll get better results by far when you do hard copy as opposed to an email appeal. So if you can do hard copy, even with a few, do hard copy.
Okay.
And then the last mistake people made, they think, well, we don't have a tax advantage in my country, so I can't really talk about an end of the year project.
Hmm.
So they don't send it out. But talk about your what's coming up in the next 12 months.
Hmm.
So here's what happened this 12 months. I'm excited about 2020, 21, whatever the year is. I'm excited about this. Let me tell you all about it. And we can't do this alone. We need your help.
Yes.
So I think that to set it for not just bail me out because I was short this year, let's work together into the next coming year.
Hmm. Very good.
Yeah, so there's 5 errors that are easily made, easily corrected.
Yeah. Well, that last one too, in particular, I realize that people like to take advantage of that tax advantage, and that might be something that's very real for some people. But Scott, it's been my limited perspective that doesn't really play that big of a role in most of my supporters' end of year decision making. I mean, it certainly does
Well,
for some, but I never got the feeling that somebody jumped into my vision for ministry and wanted to partner with me simply because there's a tax loophole. In fact,
yeah,
I think I'd be
you're
embarrassed
right.
if that was it.
Well, Aaron, you're exactly right. And documentation, studies after studies have shown this out. Why do people give? The tax advantage is way down, number 8, 9, or 10 on why they give. So you're exactly right.
Yeah.
People do not give just because they got a tax advantage. So for the Americans, if you say, be sure to get this in before January 1 because you'll get a tax break, I don't even think you need to say that.
Hmm.
Everybody knows
Yep.
that. And if you say that, then you're almost demeaning the donor.
Yeah. Yeah. And really,
No, you're
you want
exactly
your
right.
vision. You want your vision to be why they make significant gifts towards the end of the year, not just because they could get it in before January 1.
Exactly. Your vision should drive your
Great,
fundraising.
great. So now, Scott, I know that you had a list there. Let's pause real quick to talk about your books because I know you have a couple of great books. Go ahead and take the time. I'm asking you to do this, but go ahead and highlight a couple of your support reading books because I know that one of them in particular really does speak to this topic of it.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the shameless commercialism here, Aaron. The first book is Funding Your Ministry, and that's been around for a while. But this is a book that every missionary should have. It's just a guidebook for raising your personal support, and it's similar to Steve Shadrach's The God Ask. But I think you need both
Mm,
of them because mine goes a little more detail into some of the Bible study and a little more detail into some of the skills, and Steve's is a little more inspirational. So I think both those are
right.
needed. So if you have that book with you right now, let me encourage you to turn to page 125 because in a minute I'm going to give 12 tips on an end of the year letter, and they're listed on starting on page
Oh, good,
125.
great. Before you do that, though, do tell
The
us
second,
about your other book because I know that you've recently, in the last couple of years, put out a great book that's been super handy for a lot of leaders.
yeah, it's called Blind Spots, and it's written for leaders, and the subtitle is Bringing Your Staff and Ministry to Full Support. And this is not an easy book to read if you're a leader because you're going to recognize some mistakes because they're all my mistakes because I used to be a line leader in the
Mm,
field. And I made these mistakes, Aaron, and I regret that I did, but they're all in that book along with the Bible
yeah.
study. There's one more book I should tell you about. It just came out a few months ago. It's What the Bible Actually Says About Money.
Yes.
And this is not for fundraisers. This is for normal people
Hmm.
too. So this is for anybody that is a believer or even a non-believer. I gave it out to all my giving partners a couple months ago, and I've gotten very good feedback. What the Bible actually says about money. It's a 31-day devotional.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. I
Well, I
appreciate
would
that.
say also that that blind spots book, if you're just interested in leadership, I'm not just that not just if someone's raising their personal support, but if you have influence, or perhaps with your coworkers, or you're wanting to move into higher levels of leadership within your Great Commission organization, I just really think this is a good book to have. It seems as if there's a slow but necessary cultural shift within missions, and when it comes to just this whole topic, and I think that this book plays an important part in leading our leaders and training them as they lead others who are thinking about the whole process of raising support. So, Scott, thank you for writing that. But let's jump off and go back then to your to the first book that you mentioned, and that book actually was kind of my second to the Bible book that I was using early on when I was learning to raise support. The funding
Oh,
your
really?
ministry.
Second
Second
to
to
the
the
Bible.
Bible,
Wow.
yes sir, yes sir. So you got up there on my list, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, funding your ministry is starts with Bible studies, but it's basic on what to do next, and it just walks you through it. So, if some of the listeners have it today, turn to page 125. There's a diagram there, and Aaron, you've seen this diagram before, the pyramid diagram with a circle on the bottom. I call it the witch's hat diagram, and it shows on the bottom of the triangle is non-donors on your mailing list. And then the next step up is one off or sporadic donors, and then monthly, and then anchor donors at the top of the pyramid. But where a lot of us miss it is we keep our mailing lists small because they're easy to manage. But that's a mistake. A large mailing list will help you coming into the year. I'd rather write to 600 people asking them for my coming year support than
Hmm.
60 people. So the bottom of the pyramid is your non donors or deeply lapsed donors. And that's who we're going after on
Mm.
this letter. Okay, so number one on the just this is just a checklist. And Aaron, interrupt me anytime if I'm
Okay.
going too fast
Okay.
or unclear here. So number one, did I include a response slip? Now this is for hard copy only, but even on email, is it clear how people can respond? It should be just one click, hopefully, and they can get to how to give. A lot of people have sent out letters, but they didn't include a response slip, and you say, "Well, my donors know how to give." They may know how to give, but make it
Yes,
easy
make it
for them.
easy.
So number one, did I include a response slip? Number two, does my letter focus on my cash project only? Now, Aaron, there may be some people that disagree with this, but we've done studies and found if you send this out as a cash appeal letter rather than just add it to a newsletter, you'll do much better on the results. So this is not just a letter that's added to your cash to your regular newsletter. Number three, mention early in the letter why I'm writing. Mention early in the letter why I'm writing. Have you ever gotten those letters where things kind of meander about we're doing good and the kids are
Hmm.
busy and so on? Come on, come on, come on.
Unfortunately,
It's to
most of
use a
the
base.
most of the newsletters I
Yeah,
get from missionaries kind of go that way sometimes, unfortunately.
well, to use a baseball analogy, that's called warming up in the bullpen when you ought to be out on the
Yep.
mound. Aaron, I'll tell you a story here. One time, I didn't know what I was doing. I was pretty new in college, and coach sent me down to warm up because the pitcher was getting into trouble, big trouble, and I took my time warming up. I did my stretches. I tossed the ball a little bit, and then he hollered at me loud, "Morton, get in here." I
Mm,
wasn't ready. And when I got to the mound, he barked at me and said, "When I tell you to get ready, I mean get ready.
mm,
Do it now." And so in our letters, when we warm up, no, we got this letter has to be ready to go. I'll give you your first sentence in the letter. Here it is. I'm writing today to invite you to become a partner in our second missionary journey to South America.
mhm.
There it is. So I think the first or second sentence, you've got to say why you're writing the letter because when they see the pledge card fall out, they'll figure it out anyway.
Right, right.
Okay, so that's three. Number four, did I clearly state the financial goal? Aaron, when you get a letter, do you like an appeal letter? Do you like to see what the big goal is, or I
Yes,
think most
definitely.
people
In
do.
fact, if I have to turn 2 or 3 pages to find that, that's not clear. Like if I can't figure it out in the first
Yeah,
page or so, I'm wondering, is this just one of those Christmas updates, or is there actually a point that they're going to get to here?
right. Yeah, yeah, good. And some people say, well, if I tell them I need $26,000, that's too much. They'll be overwhelmed. I've not found that to be the case. In fact, the bigger the goal, usually the
Mm,
bigger the gifts, but it has to be legitimate. So, number one was, did I include a response slip? Number two, does my letter focus on my cash project only? Number three, did I mention early in the letter why I'm writing? Number four, did I clearly state the financial goal? And number five, did I offer my readers a range for giving? Um, some missionaries find this, they say it's too confrontive, but I've never had that feedback. In most of the countries I've been to, people appreciate knowing what amount could I pray about giving that would really help you. One lady from Wisconsin told me, she said, Scott, I get these missionary letters and I don't know if I'm to give $5 or $50 or 5,000 or the top off my car. I don't know. They don't tell me what I could do. So I like to give a range rather than amount. So I'll say something like, will you pray about a gift of $75 or $150? That will provide one or two discipleship kits for one or two students. But a gift of $1,000 would cover the airfare for our speaker to come in and talk to us. So if you give a range, give a reason why you're stating each amount. Okay, so give a range. Number six, did I communicate urgency? Is there a due date? Um, we might just assume that people realize it's urgent, but I think we have to give them a date, a deadline. Here's two questions we need to ask on every appeal letter. Why do I need the money? And why do I need it now? Now, if you can't answer those two questions, then do us all a favor. Don't
hmm.
send the letter because it's
Yeah.
just going to be meandering. But I think you can answer that question. Why do you need the money?
And Scott, I
Why do you
think
need it
if I
now?
can just
Now,
jump
it
in there
can't
real
be
quick,
driven.
I think that sometimes because it's so vague, ministry leaders can be guilty of not slowing down to actually take account of what their need is. They just know they're short, or they think, well, that might cost about $14,000, and that other thing might cost three, and I don't know. I'll just say I need 20,000,
Yep.
or I'll just say I need 10,000, and it's so vague that that the lack of clear understanding, perhaps on the part of the ministry leader, that actually comes through in the newsletter. And if you don't seem to know what you're talking about or what you're doing, that really doesn't inspire gifts
Yeah.
and partnership, does it?
No, Aaron, well said. It can't be a number just picked out of the air. We have to give some thought. Why am I stating this amount? And I would say, don't say 25,000. Say
Mm,
$25,116. That shows that you've done your homework. You've thought it through. No, you're exactly right. It can't be just an imaginary number, and it can't be just because we need it. There's a famous old saying in fundraising called "Send money, I'll explain later." We can't do that. We have to say why we need the money, what it's going to be spent on, And the more the reader can visualize how that money is going to be spent, a discipleship kit for a student at the University of Arkansas,
Mm,
I get it. I get it. And we need it by January 20 because
right.
that's when the program begins. That is much better than just send money.
Hmm.
I'll explain later.
Let's take a few seconds to mention an important resource that can be helpful for support raisers. CMM Press has published another great book that is not only for those who raise their personal support, but also they oversee teams or even an organization whose staff teams raises their own personal support. Scott Morton is a champion for biblically based ministry partnership development, so I highly recommend that you pick up a copy of his book called Blind Spots. It's available at cmmpress.org, where you can receive a 10% discount if you use the code SRS Podcast.
Okay, number 7. Did I tell readers how to make a gift? Did I tell readers how to make a gift? Now, this is overlooked because we think, well, they've sent gifts in the past. They know how to do it. It's obvious. They go to our website. Explain how. Don't assume. And then make it easy for your readers. Don't have them go find their own envelope. You send an envelope. Don't make them guess at the website. You give them the link. Number 8. Now, Aaron, this is the most important. I'd appreciate your comments on this one too. Number 8. Did I tell a
Mm-hmm.
ministry story?
Yes.
So often our appeal letters are they're not inspirational. They're factual. They've got all the facts well laid out. They might even be logical, but people give, I think, mostly
Mm-hmm.
because they're inspired. So, how do we inspire people to give a gift? Well, I think the best way is to tell a story. And if you tell a story about a non believer who's coming to Christ but isn't there yet,
Yeah.
that might even be
If you
best.
if you jump in and try and do all this sort of inspirational writing, which that's often what happens in a letter such as this, you're really missing the boat. I mean, completely missing the boat if there's not that story of a changed life. It's like showing somebody a
Yeah, yeah,
skeleton without having flesh on it. And it doesn't have to be your story. You might need to beg, borrow, or steal from ministry partners that you're working with. But if people don't see how their gift could potentially impact others' lives, like the story of a changed life that you're sharing in your newsletter, then once again, it just seems like a random, generalized end of year money grab instead of something with specific that says, hey, look what was accomplished in a Asif's life. Help us accomplish this in the lives of many other Asifs with your gift towards blank, blank, blank that we have to do.
yeah, good. Yeah, very good. I learned this by accident. I was making an appeal for uh, Eagle Lake Youth Camp years ago, and I was with a woman that I didn't know, but she was on the mailing list with the other Eagle Lake guy with me. We were there visiting with her, and I was very logical, and I was supposedly training him in what to do, but I wasn't doing a very good job. And finally, I could see that her eyes were glazing over a little bit. Then I said, well, let me tell you about one story, and then I think we've got to go. I told her about a kid from the inner city of Chicago that had come out to the Eagle Lake camp, and his life was touched because of Eagle Lake. He came from a broken home. He had no money to come. And so the Eagle Lake group had a sponsorship. They would sponsor
Mm,
kids and they could come for free from Chicago to Eagle Lake. And she picked up and perked up and she wrote out a check to us that night for
mm,
$25 a month for Eagle Lake. And then she handed me this check. She said, "You know what changed my mind?" I said, "No, I'm curious to know what changed my mind." She said, "You had me when you told me
mm.
about that kid from Chicago." So, Aaron, we've got to tell stories, and let's tell
Yeah.
incomplete stories. Tell stories that aren't necessarily
So
even
true.
good or
Except for
finished
they
yet.
do need to be true stories, people. We cannot be making things up.
Yeah, right.
Don't be the wrong
Don't
kind
be
of
making them
storyteller,
up.
right?
So, tell a ministry story. Number 8. Number 9. Did I personally hand sign each letter? Now, this is for hard copy. And staff has told me, and missionaries have told me, well, Scott, I don't have
Mhm.
time to hand sign each one. Well, did your donor have time to get out a check or
Exactly.
to a link? Yeah, hand sign each one and then write a note on several of them if you can. I know of one missionary who spends a whole day
Oh,
doing nothing but
wow.
writing
That sounds
notes.
painful for me. I don't have very good
Just a
handwriting,
whole
Scott.
day. I don't either. I have terrible handwriting, but a few. But don't think you got to write one on every note because then the letter will never
Right.
go out until next Christmas. Number 10, did I apologize? Now, this is important because oftentimes appeal letters start out with, well, we've been so busy, we haven't had time to write you. And you
I
probably get
got
a
one of
lot of
those
appeals this time of
yesterday,
year.
Scott. Yesterday,
Don't
I got
start
a
out.
newsletter that started out with an
Really?
apology that sounded very similar to that.
Oh, my.
No, sir.
Yeah, no, we can't do that. It may seem like you that it's an apologetic thing. It's not to the reader. Number 11, did I add extra handouts in my envelope? So sometimes we stick in our prayer card, we stick in our brochure, we stick in an invitation to the conference. No, your letter has just the appeal letter. And by the way, the appeal letter can be 1, 2, 3, or 4 pages long. Normally, for a missionary newsletter, we say
Hmm.
1 page, one topic, one picture. But for an appeal letter, it can go as long as it takes. In fact, there's been some studies done that the longer the letter, the more pages it is,
Mm-hmm.
the more money it brings in. That may be psychologically true, but take
Can
as
I
much
jump in
time
on
as you
that real
need to tell
quickly?
your story. So, but
Because I think that you hit on
yeah,
something that might cause some confusion in people. Obviously you're right, but let me dig in on that just a little bit. Your monthly newsletter, ladies and gentlemen, that you're sending out probably should be just a page. It probably should be something that's quick and concise and easy to read. I've heard it suggested more than once that you only have about 30 seconds that someone's going to look at your newsletter anyway from month to month to month. And really, what's going on here is we're saying this is different. This one is different. And so there needs to be great clarity early
right,
on
right.
regarding what this is about and what you're asking for. But that doesn't mean that this end of year newsletter can only be one page. This might actually be one that has several pages, and yet make sure the front page is well laid out and clearly states why you're writing and what you're asking for. Would that be accurate, Scott?
Yes, well said. Well said. Right. And in your regular newsletter, if you send out 3 or 4 regular newsletters during the year and then they get the appeal letter, they're not going to think, "Oh, I always hear about money." No, because they've heard about answers
Mm-hmm.
to prayer in your news other times during the year. But yeah, your end of the year letter, I would go more than 1 page. In fact, I go a minimum of 2, and sometimes I go 3,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes 4. Stick in some pictures as
Yes.
long as it takes
Now,
to
this
tell your
is a
story
bit off
well.
topic, but since
Take
we
your time.
brought up newsletters, so do I hear you suggesting that that end of year is absolutely the time to make an ask, so to speak, and yet the rest of the year not so much, right?
Yes, I'd agree. I wouldn't ask at all the rest of the year. But if you could ask in June at mid-year or maybe the start of school or end of school, as you suggested.
Mm.
But when you're going to write a newsletter, write a newsletter. When you're going to write an appeal letter, write an appeal letter. A PS on the bottom is often, please pray about our finances. Well, that's just a disguised ask for most people. So if you want someone to pray about your finances, ask one of your best prayer partners. But don't put that on the bottom of your newsletters. Okay, number 12, the last one. Did I whine? Wah, we're in trouble financially. Please help us. Well, if it comes to this, it's that bad. You need to see your fundraising coach and make a big strategic plan. So let's not have these end of the year letters be whining letters. Okay, Aaron, that's it. 12 points on page 125 to 133 of Funding Your Ministry. Hope that's helpful.
I think that is helpful. Now, obviously, you have a lot of fantastic information in that book other than that. But if somebody was looking to purchase that book, where would you suggest they go?
www.scottmorton.net.
Yes, Scott.
Scottmorton.net. And all my books are there. And also, there's 3-minute videos on fundraising issues.
Mm,
Uh,
mhm.
there's about 50 of them up there, and we're putting one up every 2 weeks. And there's blogs. My assistant Katie has done a great job with this website, and the stuff is easy to find. So
Yes, she has.
scottmorton.net.
I've had the pleasure of meeting Katie a couple of times, and she's holding you up well, sir.
Yes, yes.
Well, hey, people that had an opportunity to listen this far into the podcast, this might seem like Scott and I are being rather specific, and yet that's because we are. It is on purpose.
That's
I
right.
think in both of our experiences, people kind of wait until middle of December far too often and go, "Oh, I need to do something for the end of the year," and then they start to write it, and then they start working on printing it, and then they work on mailing it or emailing. And far too often, brothers and sisters that are doing Great Commission work, they don't give their potential supporters enough time to think and process about how they might give at the end of the year. So we definitely advocate just a real strong plan on your end long before you get to December 1 so that you are ready to go with whatever it is you're going to mail or email or send in the mail, however you're going to handle that. Please don't let it sneak up on you, but prepare for that early, perhaps even as early as October or November, so that you're really ready come December. Scott, I'd like to give you the last word, my friend. Any final words of wisdom?
Yeah, let's think of a verse of scripture here that might be we could pin this on. In Romans chapter 15, verse 20 to 24, we see Paul's outline for his own appeal for the Romans to support him on his way to Spain. And we know this verse. It's a common funding verse, but just a reminder, Romans 15:20, thus I aspired to preach the gospel not where Christ was already named. So that was Paul's mission. He led to this letter to the Romans with his mission. And I like that. So in our letters, as you think of the coming year, January 1, here's my mission. Here's what I'm trying to do. Here's the calling God has given me. I can't do it alone. Will you help me?
So good. Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining. It's always an honor to see you, to spend time with you, and definitely to have you on the podcast. I appreciate you being on this with me here today, and God bless you, my friend.
Thank you, Aaron, and God bless you and everyone listening today.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisengsolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcast from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.